So we are currently awaiting live transmission.
Okay, we are live now.
Good evening, brother and sister in the Dhamma. We are on live transmission for evening Dhamma talk with Patrick Carney. This event is organized by SBS on an online retreat with Patrick Carney. The title for tonight's talk is Tracking Experience. Without further ado, let's welcome Patrick for this evening talk.
So tonight we're going to look at tracking experience. So this is the second talk where we look at the introduction to the Satipatthana Sutta to get an overview of this practice that we're doing. Last night we talked about Satipatthana, so the applications of mindfulness. We talked about them as the journey to Nirvana or Nibbana in Pali. And here tonight we're going to look at the central practice of mindfulness meditation that is conveyed by the Buddha in a single sentence, which is repeated 4 times, once for each of the 4 applications of mindfulness. And typically for the Buddha, when he defines something, often he doesn't define it in normal sense of the word, but rather he describes someone doing it to convey what he's talking about. So this is what he says. He says, here a practitioner, surrendering longing and sorrow for the world, lives tracking body as body, feeling as feeling, heart-mind as heart-mind, Dharma as Dharma, ardent, clearly understanding, and mindful. So this is the summing up of Satipatthana practice, the central practice. So let's go through this sentence and see what the Buddha is talking about. So it begins, here a practitioner lives tracking body as body, heart-mind as heart-mind. So this is the central activity of mindfulness practice. In Pali, the word the Buddha used is anupassana, or the verb is anupassati. Anupassana is a compound word. It's made up of 2 parts. You have passana, which means seeing, and the prefix anu, which here denotes along. So seeing along. In other words, well, I translate it as tracking, to track something, to follow something. Sometimes you see it translated something like, for example, the practitioner lives contemplating. Body is body, heart, mind is heart, mind. For me, that doesn't quite work because contemplating in ordinary English implies thinking about. But tracking is not thinking about. It's something else. So let's look at what the Buddha is getting at when he says tracking. He's implying 2 things, two basic activities. The first thing is establish awareness on its object. That's the first thing we do. And we've already talked about this at the very beginning when we were talking about attention. And we described attention as the act of directing awareness towards its object. So awareness is the presence of the object. Something is present to me means I am aware of it. And if there's awareness, there's something we are aware of. So awareness has an object. So we gave the example that if I'm seeing something. If I'm thinking something. So this is the object of awareness. Attention is directing awareness towards its object. And this is noting, what Mahasi Sayadaw calls noting. When we note something, we ground awareness in an immediate, direct, face-to-face encounter with this object. Bang. This is what it is. And this directness is a characteristic of mindfulness. It's characteristic of the way that the Buddha talks about mindfulness, even the language that he uses when he talks about mindfulness. So first thing, bang, direct awareness to its object. This is what's happening right now. And notice that what we're talking about here is how we are grounding awareness, not what we are grounding it on. In mindfulness practice, awareness can be grounded on anything at all. It could be something physical like breathing or body sensation. And certainly when you start a meditation practice, that's what you would start with. You start with the body. Body sensation, breathing are the two obvious places to begin, partly because they're available. It's like you can find them without too much trouble. And also because body is always in the present. But we'll talk more about that later on. But we can ground awareness theoretically on anything. So for example, we can ground awareness on the mind that is aware. Or we could ground awareness on awareness itself, which is much more subtle. But in every case, mindfulness is directly established somewhere on something, in a direct face-to-face encounter. That's the first step, or the first activity. The second activity of tracking is having grounded awareness on something, then extend this over time. And we're practicing this from the very beginning. So we start with, okay, put your hands together like this. Can you feel your hands? So we're grounding awareness on something clear, direct. Can you feel your hands? Yes or no? And then we did the exercise in which we touching the hands, and can you maintain that awareness over a period of time? So this is the second aspect of tracking. In other words, time is built into this practice. Remember that mindfulness is the translation of the Pali word sati, and sati literally means memory. And memory requires time. So we cannot track something for just one moment. If something goes, boop, it's here for a moment and it's gone. We cannot track that. We can be aware of something for a single moment, but to track something, we have to maintain a relationship with it over a period of time. So mindfulness practice always implies awareness over time. So an ongoing relationship with awareness and the object of awareness. So this is tracking. The way that I like to talk about it is, I like to give the example. Well, first of all, you can see that in tracking, when tracking something, we don't care where it goes. What we care about is that we know where it goes. This is a really basic principle for mindfulness practice. Imagine leaping into a taxi on a crowded city street. You jump into the front passenger seat, and you say to the driver, follow that car, just ahead, follow that car. Have you seen those movies where people do this? So your taxi cab driver is really delighted that he's got a customer who wants to do this because he's watched those movies and he's always wanted to do this. So he's very enthusiastic and he heads out into traffic and he's following this car down busy city streets. And you sit back in the passenger car. At first you're concerned, you're a bit worried, can this taxi cab driver do it? But as he weaves in and out of the traffic and as he stays just the right distance behind the other car, You start to realize, now this guy really knows what he's doing. This is good. You start to relax. And then at some point, the car you were following comes to a T-junction. And the car you're following turns to the left. And without any hesitation, your taxi cab driver turns to the right. Now, at this point, would you be pleased with this development? Would you be happy about this? Or would you be upset? And would you, in fact, demand an explanation from your taxi cab driver? What the hell are you doing? Now, your taxi cab driver may be quite surprised by your response, and he'll come up with might come up with different explanations about why he's doing what he's doing. Now, it could be that your taxi cab driver is a hippie, and he says, but man, it just felt good to turn right. It's like the cosmos was telling me to turn right. I listened to my heart, and it said, turn right. Would you be happy with that explanation? It may be that he turned right just out of habit. So he says, but I expected the car to turn right. Everyone turns right here. Nobody turns left. Would you be happy with that explanation, or would you still think, no, not really? It may be your taxi cab driver was trying to be helpful. And he says, but it's so much more interesting to the right. And it's so boring to the left. You really wouldn't like it there. You'd much prefer here. No, that wouldn't be suitable either. It might be that your taxi cab driver has very strong political views, and he declares, I am so right-wing that I never make a left turn. So there's all sorts of possible reasons why your taxi cab driver turned right when the car is following turned left. But no matter what the excuse, you would feel that your taxi cab driver had failed in his job. All he had to do was follow that car, nothing else. But while you might blame him, if you reflect on your mindfulness practice, you might realize that we do the same thing as that taxi cab driver again and again. We turn away from tracking our meditation object every time we judge our experience as being in some way wrong. Every time that we believe that something else should be happening. Every time we do that, we're behaving exactly like that taxi cab driver. So, for example, have you ever gone through a meditation session and the bell goes to end it and you've thought, that went well? Or alternatively, have you ever gone through a meditation session where the bell goes and it's over and your response is, that went well, not? Have you ever had those kinds of sessions? Now, in both cases, what happens? First, we have an experience. Something happened during the meditation. And then we have a judgment laid on top of it, where the judgment actually has more significance for us than the actual experience. The concept that we put on top of the experience is actually more important to us than the experience. Yet our practice is simple. Follow that car. Now, in this case, when we judge the experience, we judge the meditation experience, what is our practice? We note the judgment. You notice how simple it is? We note that disappointment, or we note that satisfaction. But usually we tend not to do that. We get caught up in the judgment. We get caught up in the concept. we don't even realize that the judgment we are making is our situation. So something happens and we put a judgment on top of it, and we don't realize that the judgment is the situation. And this is what needs to be faced directly as the meditation object. So it's really important to recognize that in this practice, we don't care where the object of awareness goes or what it does. We care only that we follow it wherever it goes, and we understand whatever happens to it. That's the only thing that matters. So there's a degree of unpredictability built into this practice. And what this requires of the practitioner is flexibility, even creativity in the way that we do the practice. And this is really central. It does not matter what happens. What matters is that we are aware of what happens, and we maintain that awareness over a period of time. That is what matters. And this is one of the most difficult lessons for a meditator to learn. Usually when people talk about their meditation practice, what do they talk about? They talk about their good experiences, or they talk about their bad experiences. In other words, they talk about their judgments. Or they want to know, is this the correct experience? Is that a wrong experience? Is this a right experience? What they're asking questions about is their judgments about the experience. But the meditation practice isn't about the judgments, it's about the experience. So this is a very difficult lesson to learn. And the practice is so difficult because the practice is so simple. So let's go back to our sentence. Here a practitioner lives tracking body as body. So what we're doing, as we talked about last night, in this practice, we're developing a new relationship with our experience. A relationship that is free from holding on or rejecting, pushing away. And gradually this new relationship becomes a habit. It becomes our normal dwelling place. It becomes our home, where we live. And this is conveyed in the Buddha's statement that the practitioner lives tracking body as body, heart, mind as heart, mind. In other words, mindfulness is not meant to be something that we practice occasionally. And this is one reason why mindfulness practice cannot be confined to a meditation technique. It's always more than that, or alternatively, less than that. Let's say I want to give everything I have to my mindfulness practice. So I meditate 4 hours a day on a working day. 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening. On weekends, 6 hours a day meditating. And all of my holidays I spend on meditation retreats. How many of you do this, by the way? Now, if I do this, this puts me on the level of an Olympic athlete of mindfulness practice. Like, this is seriously good. Yet, no matter how dedicated I am, I do not live on my meditation cushion. I visit it. But the Buddha is saying we are meant to live this practice, not visit it. So what is he getting at? Is he saying that we are meant to be mindful all the time? And if he is saying that, how can we do it? This is this teaching I first came across many years ago when I first met Sayadaw U Pandita. This is early in 1984 when I first went to Burma, and I spent a week with U Pandita. At that time, you could only get a 1-week visa to Burma, and so I spent a week with him, being introduced to this practice. And one day, he explained to me what he expected me to do. He told me I was supposed to be mindful of everything that happened to me throughout the day, from the moment I woke up in the morning until the moment I fell asleep at night, right down to the blinking of my eyes. Now, at that point, I'd only been in Burma for a few days, and but still, I already knew the correct answer to that demand. So I gave him the right answer. Can you guess what it is? Yes, Sayadaw. It's always the correct answer. You can't go wrong with that. But while I said, yes, Sayadaw, what I was thinking was, that is impossible. But I thought, I've got to try it. So I did. And after several days, I was able to conclude, to my complete satisfaction, that I was right. It really is impossible. Now, this brings us right back to the question of time. To be mindful all day means I have to maintain a felt continuity of awareness all day. And we know how difficult that is. It's one thing, for example, to be aware of the touch of my hands. It's another thing to be continuously aware of the touch of my hands for even 5 minutes, much less for the whole day. So how is it possible? How can I maintain mindfulness, the felt continuity of awareness throughout an entire day? How can I do it? Well, as far as I'm concerned, the answer to this question is very simple. I can't. It really is impossible. However, I discovered that there is one thing which is possible. It is possible to be aware now. That is possible. It's always possible. In other words, it's possible now. I realized that if I forget about time, if I forget about maintaining awareness for an hour or for a day, if I just focus on what is happening now, then it's possible to be aware now. It's always possible to be aware now. And then now. And then now. And then now. I do not have to make something happen. It's already happening. So forget about being mindful all day. Just recognize what is happening now, and then mindfulness will naturally develop. But we have to remember it now. Here, a practitioner surrendering longing and sorrow for the world, lives tracking body as body, heart mind as heart mind. So here, let's look at surrendering longing and sorrow. First of all, we have these two terms, longing and sorrow. You get different translations in the English translations. In Pali, the two words are abhijja and domanassa. Abhijja gets translated here as longing and domanassa, sorrow. Abhijja is a word for desire, which is based on the idea of the heart leaning towards something to hold on to it. And sorrow translates domanassa, which refers to all forms of psychological pain. Now, in both cases, what the Buddha is talking about is the loss of balance that happens when our hearts reach out to take hold of something. I've got to have this. And especially something that is not actually present, and therefore is impossible to get. So this is the problem of being concerned with making progress in meditation. Something is happening right now, but instead of being fully engaged with it, the heart is reaching out into the future. I want something better than this. But since it's not here, I can't get it. So longing is the heart reaching out to take hold of something. And then we have domanassa, the pain that we suffer when we fail to get what we want. So the frustration that we suffer when we don't get what we want, or if we do get it, when we lose it. So for example, when you have a very good meditation experience and you think, okay, that's it, I finally cracked it, and then that experience never comes back. In mindfulness practice, our job is to maintain a balanced awareness of whatever is happening in the present. That's the basic job. When we reach out to hold on to something, or when we reach out to reject something, or when we build fantasies about what we want or what we despise, when we do any of this, we lose our balance. We fall over, the heart falls over into an affective entanglement. We get tangled up. Our hearts are tangled up. And this is what the Buddha means by longing and sorrow. So surrendering longing and sorrow, this means that we learn to recognize when we fall into these states of entanglement. We recognize, oh, this is what I've just done. And then we let it go. And come back to being directly engaged with what's happening right now, which in this case would be longing and sorrow. So here, longing and sorrow becomes the meditation object. So in that moment that we recognize, oh, this is what's happening, and we are aware now, in that moment we surrender longing and sorrow for the world. And this is something that we have to do again and again and again and again and again and again, because we keep falling into our habitual longing and sorrow. We keep falling into it because it is our habit. Now, so it's not easy. This practice is definitely not easy. Sometimes people make inquiries about doing a meditation. I don't know if people do this in Malaysia, but in Australia, sometimes people make inquiries about doing a meditation retreat because they want to relax. They're very stressed in their middle class lives and they want to get away and relax. So they think, oh, maybe I could do a meditation retreat. And if they're not talked out of it by the manager, they turn up and within 24 hours, they're just horrified at what they've signed on for. Because it's anything but relaxing. But it's so the practice is not easy. And the Buddha says it requires three qualities in the practitioner. And these are ardency, clear understanding, and mindfulness. So let's have a look at these three qualities. Here, a practitioner surrendering sorrow, longing and sorrow for the world, lives tracking body as body, heart-mind as heart-mind, ardent, clearly understanding and mindful. So ardent translates the Pali word atapa, which literally means heat. So ardency This is the passion, the commitment, the determination, the effort necessary to do this practice. So this brings us to the problem of effort. Because if we are meant to live our mindfulness practice, to be mindful all the time, then ardency cannot mean strain, because we cannot maintain strain. It's just impossible. If we keep pushing at something, to do something, then at some point we will collapse. It just gets too much. So we can practice like that occasionally, but we can't live like that. So if we find that we have a habit of working hard and then collapsing, working, collapse, work, collapse, work, collapse, if that's our pattern of meditation practice, then we do not have the ardency that the Buddha is talking about. He's talking about something else. So this brings us to the Eightfold Path, and we've already mentioned this. In the Eightfold Path, you have the section on meditation, and there are three qualities in it: right effort or energy, right mindfulness, right concentration or unification. So this question of right effort or right energy, samma vayama, how could we tell if we are making right effort? Well, basically, if our effort is sustainable, the longer we can maintain. Remember, we talked about how to be mindful, we have to have a sharpness of engagement. We need to be engaged with what's happening. As one of my teachers says, we can't afford to be out to lunch. We have to be present for the experience. So there's this quality of engagement with the experience. And the longer we can maintain this engagement with whatever is happening in the present, the more balanced our effort. And of course, this brings us back to the problem of time, because the problem of time and the problem of effort are very closely connected. Where do we find right effort? If we're looking for it, where do we find it? We find it in our relationship to the present. We don't find it last year when I had a really good retreat. We don't find it next year when I plan to have a really good retreat. We find it now. This is the only place it can be found. If we are leaning towards the past or leaning towards the future, instead of being fully intimate with the present, then our effort is not balanced. So the key to finding right effort is in this recognition that we are aware now. And that's one of the reasons why the role of the body is so important in this practice. Why, when we start off, we're constantly working with body, because body is always in the present. And the more embodied we are, the more present we are. So then we come to clear understanding. This is in Pali, sampajanya. Clear understanding is kind of ground level wisdom, the wisdom that comes from the continuity of awareness. I like to compare clear understanding to the wisdom that comes from living with someone over a long period of time, someone you care about. When we live with someone who is significant to our well-being, we naturally get to know this person. We get to know their habits, their sensitivities, their likes, their dislikes. We pay attention to these things because it's important for the quality of our daily life that we understand what is happening for this person. This is clear understanding. This is sampajanya. So in mindfulness practice, what we're doing is we are tracking our experience. We're tracking the inner world of thoughts, feelings, sensations, perceptions, and so on. But we're also tracking the outer world of our social interactions. And in this way, we become intimate with how experience flows for us. So we get to know ourselves, including ourselves in relation with others. So clear understanding monitors the flow of experience or watches over the flow of experience. When we were talking before about mindfulness, we gave the example of being driven to a place that we have not been before. When we know that next time we have to drive ourselves. Now, if we're in that situation, we're not just aware of the landscape flowing past us. We're mapping it in our minds. We're learning how it moves. That's different contours. It's different characteristics. We're creating an internal map of the journey. And in our mindfulness practice, we're interested in how experience flows, how our lives unfold. And this ranges from the microcosmic to the macrocosmic. So for example, how does this in-breath unfold? Microcosmic, very small. Macrocosmic, how do I live? How is it that I'm living this way? So from the very small to the very big, what we're doing is we're learning to track the flow of our experience, to see what it does, how it flows, where it goes, what influences it. This is clear understanding. And one place where we can see it is in the craft of our mindfulness practice. When the Buddha talks about meditation, he often uses the term yoniso manasikara, which could be translated as appropriate attention. This is Bhikkhu Thanissharo's translation. I find it very good. So appropriate attention is attending, paying attention in a way that is appropriate to our circumstances. And this is how we learn the craft of meditation. When we practice a meditation, we're making decision after decision after decision after decision in terms of how to relate to our experience. So for example, sometimes it's appropriate to focus closely in on a meditation object. Sometimes it's appropriate to step back from a meditation object and receive it. Sometimes it's appropriate to focus in on a small object. Sometimes it's appropriate to open up to a big object. Sometimes it's appropriate to make more effort. Sometimes it's appropriate to make less effort. Sometimes it's appropriate to be still, and sometimes it's appropriate to move. So there are all sorts of decisions that we're making all of the time, and these decisions help us learn the craft. So clear understanding is the skill of the craft. And this craft of meditation is learned through trial and error. And in the beginning, error predominates. Mostly it's mistakes. So mistakes and experiments play a very important role in meditation practice. Our mistakes are really valuable because they are our teachers. We don't learn and then do things. We learn by doing things. So we learn from recognizing our mistakes and then realizing what not to do. So we bump into a wall and recognize that's not the way to go. So failure is always valuable. There's one writer in one of the popular American Dharma magazines wrote that a basic qualification for success as a meditator is the ability to live with failure. It's really important. Failure is always valuable. So mindfulness is remembering to be present to our experience. Clear understanding is the intelligence we bring to that process. And the Buddha often uses the compound word sati sampajanya, mindfulness and clear understanding, as a single word, single compound. And mindfulness and clear understanding could be described as intelligent presence. So when we are practicing mindfulness, we are not just present, we are intelligently present. So we're developing our natural intelligence in the way that we're doing this practice. In other words, we learn to take responsibility for our experience. It's not just a matter of reproducing a technique. It's not just a matter of obeying the orders of a teacher. We learn to monitor what's going on. We learn to check our experience. We learn to ask questions about it. And this is one reason why it's so important to learn to communicate about our meditation experience, both with our peers, our fellow meditators, and with our teachers. That's one of the reasons why we have question and answer, why we have group discussion, why we have one-on-one interviews. It's learning to communicate about experience. And if we can learn to, in order to be able to communicate the experience, we have to know what it is. So we have to be monitoring it. And in taking something as intimate as a meditation experience, bringing it up into words, and then getting it across to someone else so that they actually understand what we're talking about. This is part of clear understanding. This is part of developing the skill of the craft. And then finally, we have mindfulness. This is at the center of our practice. And of course, we've been talking about this before, but it's always useful to repeat a bit. As we've said, mindfulness remembers awareness. Essentially, mindfulness is memory. And we remember awareness. And it has two distinct flavors. We remember we are already aware, or we remember to be aware. These are the two flavors. Let's look at them, at how they play out in the moment that we realize that we are distracted. So let's say we're practicing mindfulness meditation. At some point, we are distracted. And have you noticed that when we're distracted, at first, when you're distracted, you don't know that you're distracted. And then suddenly you realize, oh, I'm distracted. So let's look at that moment when we realize, oh, I'm distracted. And look at these two flavors of mindfulness. So sometimes when we come out of a distraction, we experience it as simply knowing I am distracted. So for example, oh, I'm thinking. Have you noticed how you can be lost in thought, but not know that you're thinking? And then suddenly realize, oh, I'm thinking. And you're already halfway through a big drama. This is remembering I am already aware of this distraction. And this is the flavor of mindfulness we find in particular in ordinary everyday activities. So ordinary everyday mindfulness, when we're just living our lives, but living our lives mindfully. So right now I'm seeing, right now I'm thinking, Right now I'm hearing, I'm moving, I'm touching, I'm wanting, and so on and so forth. So this is, it's very ordinary, it's nothing special, it's just reminding ourselves, now I am already aware. This is the first flavor of mindfulness. Now, sometimes when we're meditating, we realize we're distracted. The distraction, as soon as we recognize it, bang, it disappears. And our awareness goes back to our meditation object. We don't have to try to make it go back. It just goes back, bang, immediately. This is the second flavor of mindfulness. I'm supposed to be aware of this, my meditation object. So this is remembering to be aware of this particular thing, my meditation object. And this is the flavor of mindfulness we cultivate when we do a formal meditation practice, when we are cultivating samadhi, concentration, or integration. So we find this in particular with the grounding object, our relationship with the grounding object. Just bang, back to the grounding object, back to the grounding object, back to the grounding object. This is the second flavor of mindfulness. And as we said before, you notice that the movement of awareness from one object to another is not distraction. Distraction occurs when awareness moves and we don't see it move. Distraction is found in forgetting and the absence, the delusion that comes with forgetting. When we remember, we are present again. And when we are present to our distraction, we are already mindful. So the central activity of mindfulness practice is reminding ourselves now of what's happening and then tracking this over time. Now, what should we be mindful of? As we said before, fundamentally, it doesn't matter what we remind ourselves of. What matters is the reminding. Or we could say that the objects of mindfulness don't matter. What matters is the mindfulness itself. That's the basic principle. So, at the center of our practice is mindfulness. Mindfulness is memory. Its opposite is forgetting. We forget again and again, and every time we forget, we find ourselves caught up in our habitual stories. And it's natural to forget because it's our habit to forget. And we are going to forget many times. This does not matter. What matters is the remembering. Each time we remember, each time we realize we've just been distracted, we tend to judge ourselves. We tend to judge this experience too, and we judge ourselves as inadequate because we're focusing on the forgetting. And we think that should not have happened. I should not have been distracted, which is rather like saying I should not be a human being. And what's important as meditators is not what happened in the past. The past, back then when I was distracted, is already just a concept. What's important is that now we remember. And as soon as we remember, we are already mindful. So why not take, when you realize you're distracted, why not take the attitude, I just remembered. That's fantastic. I am already mindful. So let's emphasize the remembering and recognize that each moment that we remember is a moment of pure gold for the meditator because it's the arising of mindfulness. And each moment of mindfulness strengthens the mind. So we just keep reminding ourselves. And this is tracking experience. Okay, that's enough for tonight. Thank you.